Okay, good evening. Today is February 1st, and this is L M II, and it's the evening section. So for those who are reviewing on YouTube, that's what you get. And today I'm going to go through the homework assignment just one by one. Yeah, let's just get started, and as soon as we got it covered, we can sort of choose to stay with what we have, perfect that, refine it, whatever, and we can discuss where we want to go. We've actually taken a very, very big step forward. So if we can, most of the homework I received, I could see that people are getting most of it. There's some details that are not really working still, but that's okay. It's still just the second week of the studies in the new semester, and this is theory 2, so we got time. We should be complacent, but I think we're sitting pretty well, I would say. So here are the keys that we're working on. I'm just going to do them one by one, and you can follow on your homework and correct yourself to see what you have and see where you may have made some mistakes, and then we can ask some questions and clear things up as we go along. Okay, so here goes. I'm just going to break it down completely. The first key is F. We have our F major triad here. That will be the simplest way that we understand this F major triad. So the note F, a major third up, there will be 2 whole steps, F to G, G to A, and then from A, a minor third up, there will be a step and a half from A to B, B to C, that's a whole step and a half step. So here's our F major triad. If I invert that, you know what, I'm going to take it down here. If I invert that, I would obviously just put this one upstairs and keep the 2 other notes. So here I have F, and here I have F/A. Now, if I take this, so I'm just going to work on this this part of the board because that's easier for me. So if I plug that up in 4 parts, I'm simply going to take the F here and say put it down. I can put it down here, for instance. And what I'm going to do now, instead of having this voicing here, where I have the chordal root, third, and fifth, I don't want the fifth on top of the root, to be the top voice, because it's harder to invert. So I'm going to take the third. Let me color it. You can also review the lesson from this morning. This morning was very efficient. I know that some of you watched the lesson from last week, from the morning section, where we had actually quite an interesting discussion, I think, and I know that one of you will agree with that. And so that was a little bit of a long lesson, and we got to discuss a whole bunch of things, which sometimes is very nice. The morning lesson, I think we got a few things cleared out, and the morning lesson was very efficient and to the point, which is also good. It's just a different kind of lesson. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to color in the chordal third, and then you can see that we're going to sort of keep track of that. I'm actually going to do something today. I'm going to color in the root with black, and then the chordal third with red. And you will see that the chordal fifth, this one here, is just functioning, in this case, like a fulcrum, so to speak, around which the 2 other notes are sort of able to swing around. That we either have it in the bass, the root, and in which case we're going to put the chordal third on top, like this, or we have the opposite, where I have the third here, and the root here. And all I'm going to do now is to add the chordal fifth. I can do that, for instance, here. In this case, just erase that. Get that a little better. In this case, I'm simply just going to put it in the alto, but it could be, you know, because the other C that we have available is above the soprano, and that then makes that the soprano. So we want to stem this right away to remind ourselves that nothing goes above the soprano, you know. And in this case, we're just going to double the F here. Then I could also put the tenor's F an octave up, but it's better in this case like that. So here you can see that this will be the same result. You see? In which case, I have doubled the root in both of these chords. One, this one here, that's F, just straight F, F major, and this is F major, but A is in the bass. So this is in first inversion because the chordal third is in the bass. This is root position. This is first inversion, right? And you can see that this note here is the chordal third. It's a bit difficult to switch between these. And here's the root. And in here, I have the opposite going on, or the inverse. If this is not clear yet, I think by just doing a whole bunch of examples, you can see, now I get it. It's sort of by doing it that we learn it, right? And that's the value of homework, is that you get to sort of try it out, because it looks easy when the guy is doing it. In this case, the guy is me, right? But when we're watching somebody do something, say on YouTube, or we go to the deli and we see the guy cracking eggs with one hand and stirring with the other, you know, that's actually something that impresses me quite a lot, because you can see that there's no raw way to learning that. You can't just learn it by understanding how it's done. You actually have to do it. You got to get your feet wet here and just do it. So my point is that by my doing it over and over again, you can see gradually, now I think I got it. You know, we clear up sort of a few mistakes that we might have, and then we can do it too. So this is a really big step forward, in fact, that sometimes we're not quite aware of. Are we taking a small step forward or a big step, you know, and how do you evaluate that? Well, here we're doing a whole bunch of things. We're actually dealing with inversion. We're dealing with voicing, and we're dealing with the fact that many people are confused about what the root of a chord is if it's not in the bass. So it's a sort of circular argument in some ways, that if the root is not in the bass, it's still the root, and it may be in a different voice or whatever, but that means that the chord is inverted. And now we have to be able to distribute the voices so that we double the root, right? No matter if the root is the soprano or if it's the bass, we sort of at the starting point. That's not always true as we go forward, but it's a good way into it. It's actually the best way to get this started. That we see the dynamic really is between the chordal root and the chordal third. These are the ones that are doing what we call voice exchange, right? And that's a very, so VX sometimes, I know that's probably just my abbreviation, but I very often indicate, when I teach counterpoint, for instance, I sort of indicate that in the student scores, that this is a technique that's very often used in counterpoint. We don't need to deal with counterpoint right now, but basically counterpoint is, if I took the inner voices out of this equation here, we would have two-part counterpoint. We would just have two lines that are moving against each other. The reason why that's a good thing to study is that when we say, if you improvise, for instance, let's say you're a trumpet player and you're improvising on top of a jazz standard tune, what you're doing, in fact, is that you're superimposing a tune of your own device, one you made up. You're playing that against the set of chord changes, but also against the melody that we already know. So you're sort of doing melody against melody, or what is in what a more technical term is called counterpoint. Pontus contra pontus, that's the origin of it. A pontus is simply just a note. So if you have a string of notes, you have a melody. And if you have another melody that's played against that melody, the first melody, then you have counterpoint, basically. But it's the same as improvised. It's the same thing. and probably counterpoint was invented way back in the day because if you, let's say you're singing in a room where you hear a lot of reverberation, you have reverb, right? The delay of the sound. You can hear your own melody loop onto itself. You probably, if you try that in a room that's very reverberant, you can sort of see that, or hear rather, that the first part of the melody is repeated like with a little bit of delay. And then as you move forward in your melody, you hear the first part played against what you're just singing or playing. That's basically counterpoint. And that's basically the art of improvising too. So if we can get, so the point here is, the point, no pun intended, but the point is that if we can get the outer voices to behave in a particular way, then everything else falls into place. We can pretty much see that here is a good place to put the C. And so we double this one here. Now we double it again up here, and then we see that the C fits in really well. That happens to be the same C. It's what we call C4, right? Middle C, that one. It's actually the same C. The fact that the tenor is playing it here and the alto is playing it here doesn't really matter, but there's a certain symmetry in this. And we can see that the inner voice here is also inverted, right? Do you understand what I mean?
Yes, Professor.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad you you're actually expounding on this here, because it was one of the in the homework, one of the keys was giving me some issues, and I doubled, but I wasn't too sure I did the right thing. But I see it's good to know that you should double the root.
And that's why, so the point about homework is that it's good to sort of noodle with it at home and see what we can figure out, right? And it's also okay to make mistakes. It's actually part of learning is to make mistakes and to be a little bit frustrated that you say, oh, I can't get everything right, but I think I understand the principle behind it. Let's see in the next class, because I'm going to go through the homework, right? So you can correct yourself. That's sort of, I work with two assumptions. A, you're adults. That's particularly true in this class. In the evening section, that's very often true. In the morning section, you get students who are technically adults, but perhaps not quite they don't understand the full implication of that. Sometimes I doubt that anyone does, but that's just me. And so the other assumption I go from is that you're all here voluntarily. Nobody's forcing anyone to go to university, and particularly not to take a music degree, because I think you sort of preserve the medal just up front for doing that.
For me, it was how did you get C being in the root? That's why because I was a bit confused, because I was trying to follow the examples, but yeah. I was just being thrown, and I'm just like, I'm not sure if I'm doing this correctly, because right. I know.
It's just a process of elimination. That if I place the F and I place the A, then the only note left is C, right?
Yeah, but the examples had I don't know, maybe it's just me, but the examples had looked a little different. So I was just trying to.
It can look different too. Let's say, for instance, I take the A up here. I mean, that would be a very high soprano, but let's just look away from that for a second, right?
Yeah.
If I did that, for instance, then I have a lot of options, because I can get both the F and the C in and still be, and the same thing here, right?
Okay, because if you if you take, okay, because in the examples, the way how you had it was where you move the A all the way an octave up.
Yeah, let's do that. Let me show you.
Yeah,
Yeah?
okay. Okay.
Okay. I'm just going to show you. I'm just going to stay with one pen color just because it's quicker. I'm not going to switch back and forth, but we understand that that's what's going on here. I'm going to place my F again, and now I'm going to place my A up here. That means I can, for instance, I can put the C down here, and I can put the F here. That's fine, right? And now if I invert it, I'll put the F up here now, right? And I'm going to put the A down here, for instance, like that. Now I can still keep these, right? And I've still doubled the root of the chord, which is still F, right? I've still doubled the root. I've still doubled, here's the doubled root of the chord. Here's the doubled root of the chord. So there's a lot of ways that this could be correct, so to speak, right?
Wait, so you started with the F in the bass.
Yeah.
In the bass clef. So you didn't put, so because I guess what my issue was is that I started with the F in like with F4. And
yeah,
then,
that's a little high. But let me show you that I can also do it in a different way. You know, once we open up this stuff here, I can do this, right? Now I've doubled my root here, and then I can put my C up here, right? And when I invert this, I would probably choose to do it the same way, meaning that I will keep the C here and keep the F here. I mean, it's just that here it's a little harder to read this because we've got those two ledger lines, right? You know, so that's a little bit harder to read, but it's the same thing. So it's not, you will probably very quickly realize that in music theory, for instance, as a discipline, that there are very, very often more than one correct answer. I mean, this involves the same notes, but the all-important aspect that we are trying to develop right now is this, the outer voices here. If we can get those to behave, meaning if we can juggle the chordal root and the chordal third, and here the root and the third. If I isolate that, this is generically true for all the examples. Here's the root, so I put the third on top. Here is, now I invert it, so I have the opposite or the inverse, right? This is true, so plug in your key and go. This is your cheat sheet, so to speak. And all the inner voices here are there just to support this system. But depending on how, you know, what distance we're creating, we have more or less, more or fewer options, right? Do you understand?
Yeah, so if you're mapping out the chord, this example here just makes life a bit more difficult because you have to put in ledger lines to avoid that.
Yeah.
So with the tenor and the alto, you just swap.
Yep.
okay, because that's the example. I'm still not getting it because that's the example that you told us to use, but I'm still not following this one.
So let's do it this way. Let me go forward and go through all these examples here, right? And I bet you, Shamir, at the end of it, you say, now I get it. It's simply this, look, you have.
All right, so we start out, okay, so you start out with the root position, correct?
Yeah.
Right, which is, I'm just gonna do it the regular way. So it's F and A being the middle note and C was I mean, C being it was F, A, and then C was the top note, correct? Yes. No, not in that example, your first example.
Yeah, this one here, this is where we were last year, where we were just going to stand, right?
So then you so then you did the first, what is it called? Inversion.
Mm-hmm.
And from the first inversion, is that where you did the voice?
exchange.
Exchange.
Yeah,
And
that's
so,
between root position and first inversion. Yeah.
so the voice exchange is from the first inversion.
It's between the root position and the first inversion. It's between two chords. You can't exchange something if you don't have two of them. You know what I mean? If I swap something with you, you have to give me something and I give you something. Then we are exchanging goods.
Yeah,
Right?
because so that's because I'm trying to figure out how you got C as the bottom note. Is where you inverted it and then you have A and then I see C.
Bottom note in any of these cases, right?
Yeah, from the first inversion you have F at the top, then you have A and then C, correct?
Yeah, but C is not the bottom note here.
I'm sorry. I mean, yeah, that's what I was trying to figure out because over here you said C at the bottom, C4. So I was trying to figure out how did you get C4 at the bottom?
Okay, if you back up, okay, let me just erase this because when we go forward, you will see that it falls into place. It always does. I was
Okay,
talking
so
about
go
this.
a little slower because I'm trying to follow.
Okay, that's fine. What I was saying is that this C is C4. That's that C. The same, so this is the treble clef and this is the bass clef, right? So in the bass clef, that C is C4. So is this. This is in the treble clef. That's also C4. That's the same note. Right?
Yes.
That was just that. And if you
you just added that in.
Yeah.
Oh, because I was trying to figure out where, so you just added in just to create that's what I was trying to figure out, like, where did it come from? Because I was thought maybe you took it from the.
It came from here, right?
That's what I was trying to find out.
Yeah. So if you place the root and you place the third, then you are 90% done. Then the remaining note, which would be, you just have to place them in one of the inner voices. Doesn't really matter which one. And here's the other. So we have actually taken a giant step forward.
So
we're doing triads. Just listen here. We're doing triads, right? So that's a root, a third, and a fifth. Yeah. But we're doing it in 4 parts, and that means that one of the notes in this triad has to be doubled because we've got 4 voice parts.
Okay.
Yeah. And the first note to be doubled usually is the root of the chord. No matter where that is, and right now we have 2 choices for the root. It can either be at the bottom, in which case it's root position, or it could be somewhere else, usually at the top. If it's not in the bottom, it's in the top.
So you can move it around anywhere, any position you want to put it.
Well, right now we just have 2 choices. We either have root position or first inversion. I don't want to open up because you can have a second inversion chord, but that behaves in a different way. That actually acts in a slightly different way because and you can hear this. Let me take this chord here. If I take an F major triad, that would be a root position F major triad. If I invert that once, we can hear that that's still related to the same root. But if I go one step further, we can hear that this one here needs to move, and then it will resolve to there. So in other words, the second inversion triad doesn't relate back to this, to this root here, because that will move to another root. It simply works in a different way. So therefore, the second inversion triad, I'm not including that in this equation yet, right? So right now we have 2 choices. I mean, in principle, you're right that we can move the root to wherever we want it, but in principle, or in actual practice, we either have it as the lowest sounding note, also called the bass, or we have it as the top note, also called the soprano. So what we're trying to do is to get the outer voices, the bottom voice and the top voice, to work together, because that's the way that music works really well. And I gave you the example of an improvised melody, for instance. When we improvise, what we are doing is that we are adding a melody on top of another melody. So that's a good technique to be able to develop. Okay, let me go forward and do another example, right? Yeah. So remember that we just moved, oops, we moved everything down here so that our grand stop is now here, right? So this is not the bass clef and this is not the treble clef, but the other way around, right? Yeah?
Mhm.
Okay, G minor. So I'm just going to write it up generically. It would be a G, and then a minor third up, step and a half would be B flat, and then a major third up for B flat, 2 whole steps is D. There is my root position, G minor, like that, right? G minor. Now I'm going to invert it. I'm just going to put the G up here and keep the 2 other notes. This is now still G minor, but it has B flat in the bass. So far, so good. That's kind of where we were at the end of last semester. We are still referring back to what we already know. Also because we got, you know, new people coming into the class or people who've been away for a little bit, et cetera, et cetera. So it's good to sort of review this. Good for all of us. Now I'm going to write it up in 4 parts. I'm going to take the G and maybe just create a lot of space here. So there's my G. If the problem in solving these homework assignments is to read the start notation, and I know it is for many students at Nyack, that's still a problem, then go to one of these websites that are listed in the syllabus and drill yourself in what is called clef reading. Go to, for instance, go to Note Builder or the one called theoria.com. And simply just set your smartphone or your tablet or your computer to flash these exercises in recognizing the notes. You know, and you answer basically by pressing a little button. Say this one here, is that a G flat? And you press the little button saying G flat, and then it will tell you if you're right or wrong. And because computers are very good at this, there are many things computers are not so good at. For instance, computers are not human beings. They can't see how close you were. They only know if you're right or wrong. But they can't tell you that, oh, you're almost right, or let's say for instance, let's say that's the note, and you say that's a B flat. Then I, as a human being, can say, okay, so now you're reading in the wrong clef, because you're mistaken in thinking that this is a B flat, because in that clef it would have been a B flat, but in some other clef it's a different note, right? I mean, I can see that, but the clef reading exercise can't really tell you how close you were. It will just tell you that you're wrong, and you don't know how you're wrong. It's almost like signing in to some, you know, website or whatever. Your username or password is wrong. You don't know which one. Right? Have you tried that? And you have nothing to go by. You just know that one of them is wrong, and you don't know what you've done wrong, and you don't know that it's just because you have a little dot missing, or you misspelled something, or whatever. You just don't know, because computers are not really very smart in that sense. They're very literal. They really are. I remember when we established our current IT program. You know, I wanted to check my email, and I kept asking my colleagues, how do you sign into your email? So, oh, mynyack.com, right? And I tried mynyack.com, and I was time and time again taken to a real estate agent in Nyack, New York. And I couldn't figure this out. And then one guy sort of said, okay, let me see you do it. And I typed in mynyack.com, and it took me, of course, to the real estate agent. Said, oh, no, it's my.nyack.com. They said, how am I supposed to know that? Well, everyone knows that. Except those who don't. But now you do, right? So it's a little bit like that, you know, computers are very literal, but they're not very smart. They're not smarter than we can program them. Okay, so I've got my G placed. So that's this one here. Look at that. That one I put down here. Now, instead of just going up root, third, fifth, and then putting my fifth up on top, I'm going to take my chordal third. Right? This is the whole exercise. I'm going to take this note, the B flat, and I'm going to put that as my top note. Because now I can invert. When I write this chord out, this is G minor, yeah? When I write out my G minor chord in first inversion, I can now invert both the soprano and the bass and do what we call voice exchange. I'm going to do that. I'm going to simply just say, okay, this one here becomes the next soprano, and this one here becomes the next bass. Yeah? So far, so good? Give me a thumbs up if you understand this. Good. Okay. There's not a whole lot to understand here. I mean, meaning that just say, yes, I understand that this is a G and this is a B flat, and now they're just flipped around. That's all there is to it. Now I'm going to check my triad again. I'm going to go back to this one here and say, I'll place my G, I'll place my B flat, because that's that one, right? So that one I don't need to worry about anymore. Now I have to place my D, yeah? So my D, I have several choices. I can do this, right? Or I can do that. I could also put the D down here, but that would be a very low tenor. I want to sort of stay away from that. And then I also have to double one of the notes. So which note do I double?
You double the G.
Yes, the one that gives it the name. It's a G chord, so you want as much G as you can get. So I can either, if I go up here and say, okay, now I've put in another G, that's perfectly fine, right? Now I then have, by process of elimination, I can put my D in here. Yeah? Or I can flip these two voices around. Let's say I decide to go with the D here. That means I can put my G in here. And then when I move this over, I can just do the same here. And that means that if I, let's say I'm writing, so this is now G minor over B flat or slash B flat. It's still a G minor triad because it contains a G, a B flat, and a D. And so does this one, G, B flat, D. And the root is doubled. Here's my root, it's still G. It's doubled there. And in this case, it's doubled here. But just as long as you have two G's in that chord, it's a G minor triad.
Professor.
Yeah.
Can we also say, in terms of how the notes move, we can say that in the bass clef, the root moves up a third, and in the treble clef, the top note goes down a third.
If you don't call it the root, the bass goes up a third, but the root is the root. And the root in this chord here is the soprano, right? It's still G, it's still the root. So it's not that the root has moved. This is not a B flat chord. This is where chord inversion. I mean, look, in the old days, and I can give you very specific historic sort of data on this. Before 1722, because on 1722, and of course there was a practice before that, but there was a book by a French composer called Jean-Philippe Rameau. He proposed that these two chords are in fact the same chord. One is just an inversion of the other. prior to that, all Baroque musicians would understand this to be a B flat chord with an added sixth, which it isn't. Right? They would, and old-fashioned, let's say, jazz musicians who are like around probably the age of 60 or 70 these days would still sometimes call that B flat six. And that's the same thing. That's just another way of expressing it. But essentially, these two chords are the same.
Okay. So then what we can say is, instead of saying the root, so in this example here, or this particular topic, the bass notes go up a third, the soprano notes go down a third.
Yes, my friend, that's it.
Okay.
That's it. You got it. You got it. Here, that's what we hear. And it's a very, very nice sound, actually. We can hear that there's a great deal of symmetry in it, for instance, right? That would be a good progression that we all understand. And if I were to play it, say, that would be the harmonization set. And you heard, a whole ton of chorales setting hymns that start out that way. So this is a very, very common technique. We're learning a whole bunch of things here. We're actually learning counterpoint. We're learning how melodies are moving against each other, right? We're also learning chord theory, and we're learning about notation. We're reinforcing all the things that we already know, and we're learning how to basically arrange by applying sort of different techniques that we can do. Okay, let me go on, because I think, as I said a moment ago, I think it's in the doing it that we understand it. But just remember that in terms of the homework, let's say you have a few things right, but a lot of wrong notes. Then don't take that as I don't understand it, or now I'm going to get a D and my life is over, and the professor's going to send me off to the sausage factory and that's the end of my music career. I mean, that is not the way it works. Homework is not there to punish you or anything. It's there to see how much do you know when you're sitting in your room by yourself and doing it by yourself. And then we take it to the class and we do it together, where you can ask questions, and I sort of leave the pen, so to speak, and you can see how very soon, from now, you will be able to do it like I do it. I promise you, this is not more difficult. It's, I wasn't born with some special skill that you just don't have, right? I mean, this is just like if you go, if you try to learn to be an auto mechanic, for instance. I mean, you can't take apart a fuel injector and put it back together again in your first day of class, right? I mean, because you have to know certain mechanical bits, and you have to know which, what the function of certain common things that you see in all mechanical parts. Certain nuts and bolts are fitted together in a particular way because they work in a particular way. You have to learn all that before you can sort of start to take it apart an engine and put it back together again. I mean, that goes without saying, doesn't it? The same with cooking. I mean, I'm not going to start with the most complicated dish that I can find, even if I like it a lot, because that's not a good way to learn. So this exercise here, we're basically just doing, so we've done F, we've done G minor, now we're going to do E flat. This exercise, we simply just have to learn to manipulate the root and the third chord. That's it. And it will take as long as it takes. For some people, they can sort of rattle it off right away, and then they might get stuck in a different place. And other students will take a little longer. That's typically the case where we sort of, we're fumbling around a bit and making mistakes. And we just have to embrace that and say that that's part of learning, and then we clean it up together and we move forward. Okay, so E flat, yeah? We're now doing E flat. E flat, it's major. We can see that because there's no minus or plus or diminished or augmented. So that's an E flat major triad, 2 whole steps up from E flat to F, whole step, F to G, whole step, there's my major third, and then a minor third up from G, G to A to B flat. Here's my E flat major. So that's, here is E flat in first inversion. What I've done is that I've simply just taken the next, so let's say E flat here. That's it. Just an octave. You get the point, though. You know. And my piano's on tune up here. A little funky up there. Okay, so that's, you know, you can write this up if you need to. I mean, I think at this point, it's probably a good idea to write this up, right? It doesn't hurt. Although, you know, technically speaking, this is what where you finished last semester and that you could do, you know, to a certain level. Now I'm just going to do that in 4 parts. I'm going to say, okay, here's my bass clef. Remind myself and say, here's my E flat. Right? That's this one here. That one I don't need to worry about anymore. Now I'm going to take the chordal third. That will be this one. Root, third, fifth. I'm going to take the G and I'm going to put that up as my top note. Like that. So far, so good, right? Shimmy, are you with me, right?
Yeah, I'll just go over it again because I'm gonna need more time with it, but I think I'm getting it slowly but surely.
Good. And you'll have as much time. I mean, I think we should just stay with this. There's no reason to move forward. But what I can do is just to give you guys some more exercises, some more keys. I mean, basically, you can invent your own keys. Just take one of the keys that we haven't done, right? Say, for instance, E flat diminished or whatever. You can just make up your own keys and say, let me do a few more, because the same principle over and over again. Okay, now I've placed my G, so I don't need to worry about that anymore. I have to now place a B flat. What are my choices? Well, a good choice would be here, right? Because that would fill in this very nicely, and then I have to now put another E flat in, because I need to do it in 4 parts, and that means I have to double one of the notes. The first note to double is the one that gives the chord the name. So E flat is the root of that chord, and that's the one, your first choice of doubling is the root. And can I get an E flat in? Yes, I can. I can get it in here, for instance, right? That would be a very good way to do it. So now I'm going to invert all of that. I'm going to put this one here down. I'm going to say, okay, that one goes down here. That's the chordal third, root. And third, those are the ones I want to invert. So this one here, let's say, I'm going to take this up here, because that gives me a little more space to juggle. You know, if I put it down here, I don't have a lot of space then, right? Although if I do that, then I've got a simple choice to make that sort of gives itself. Because we can now see this one still fits in very well here. Now I have to double the root of the chord, right? And that's easy. There you go. But it's not, I mean, I want you to understand that it's not the only choice that I have. But that just seems like a really good way to do it. Very efficient. You can have 2 of the voice parts singing the same note.
And it keeps the harmony tight, right? It keeps the harmony tight.
Yeah, exactly. And especially, what we're learning here is not just good technique, but it's also good technique if you work with amateur choruses. Because when you're working with, let's say you're writing for the Metropolitan Opera Chorus. Most of the singers there are very, very good sight readers, right? You know, they're professional level singers, and a good many of them probably have perfect pitch. So you can write really badly and they can still sing it, right? You understand? I remember some time ago, and it's just, you know, occasionally I would poll my students and I'd say, look, I have a very close friend and colleague who teaches at Juilliard, where you accept about 5% of the students who apply. I mean, you have the whole world applying to Juilliard, and you accept 5%. That means that you're rejecting 95% of the students who are applying to Juilliard. So presumably, the 5% that you keep are very good students. I mean, courtesy of the Fire Department of New York. And certainly they're very good at certain things. I mean, which means that you don't need to teach them a lot. So you can actually, in fact, be a horrible teacher and you still get away with it because your students are very good. Right? And it's just a dynamic that many people are not really thinking about. I mean, but I had a conversation with my colleague, and I sort of explained to him what I'm doing at Nyack, where the situation, where the numbers are sort of working out a little bit differently, right? And it's not to say that the Nyack students are not talented. They're talented in different ways. First of all, I think they've got their stories to tell than the typical sort of 14, 15-year-old Asian student that you have at Juilliard or Curtis or Manhattan School of Music or whatever. I don't think there's a whole lot of story in there, but that's not the way the world looks at it, of course. But part of that equation is that sometimes when you have students who have a lot of life experience, for instance, they may experience certain problems in learning new things because that hasn't been the most positive experience in their life. Which, so that means that very often you will find that a setting like that, you have to have much better teaching shots. And so here's the reference that I was saying to you, Gilad, that if you're working with an amateur chorus, you actually have to have much better writing jobs. Because the singers there are traditionally speaking they're not phenomenal sight readers, and they probably don't have perfect pitch. I mean, perfect pitch means nothing. It's just, it's easier for you to sight read or sight sing for sure, because you can already hear the note when you're reading it. But my point is, though, that when you're working with an amateur chorus, let's say in South Bronx or something like that, you have to have absolutely sterling writing technique. Otherwise, they can't sing it, and you're going to rehearse a lot more, and you're not going to get paid a dime more for rehearsing a lot more. You're going to get paid a flat fee, and I can tell you that if because of your clumsy writing, you have to call an extra rehearsal, and your choristers have to hire a babysitter and get away because they're usually volunteers, right? They're not going to like you very much. And if that keeps happening, you might find yourself called into the pastor's office and say, look, I think we're going to go with another guy. You're very nice and we like you a lot and all that, but I mean, you're rehearsing way too much. And what ends up happening is two things. Either you leave the position or you're forced out, or you're forced to not be able to do the music that you really want to do. Let's say you have no real arrangements. You're just having a congregation singing the same tune, all of them, right? Called monophonic singing. There's nothing wrong with that, but it just limits the choices that you have. You can't really do many things because they can't sing part written songs, right? And that it sounds really, really good when you can do that. You always got a choice of reducing things and singing just a congregational hymn. That's always a choice, right? But if you want to set like a funeral hymn, for instance, for a chorus of mixed voices with 2 female and 2 male voices, that is a really, really nice way to do it, right? And you'll find probably that in the churches where the jobs are a little better paid, that they have those facilities put in place, and that they expect you to be able to fulfill a role like that and do it well. So we're trying to give people the options of A, go to grad school. We've had a number of students from Nyack, I think 16 by last count, who've been admitted into Manhattan School of Music, right? so far we've only had one, and it kills me, right? We only have one student actually complete the education there. The rest of them bowed out. It's not because they didn't have the talent, but they simply didn't have the motivation to do some of the skills that was needed for that degree. And that's a pity, because voice-wise or whatever instrument they played, they were way prepared for it. But this stuff turned out to be a bit of a drag. There's no reason for that, because we just have to stay with it. We have to go forward and we have to learn it, right? All right, let me do another one. So this one here is got one
Dr.
example
Francis,
of how to do it. Dana, go.
speaking of four-part harmony, I'm going crazy because the when you did the voice exchange, what would
Yeah.
you do if you were voicing that for 4 parts? I see where you have, you have your third in the bass,
Yeah,
and then
then my root
yeah,
on top.
what would you do? It looks like you just have for alto. What are you gonna do after that? So you got bass, tenor, alto. What
Yeah.
would
So
your
what
preference
do you
be
do
for?
after this? Is that what you mean?
Well, because we went from a 4-part SATB
This is
to
4
just a
parts.
3-part, it's
Yes.
still
Look at
4.
the same thing. I have both the altos and the sopranos singing the E flat. Here's
So
the
they're
tenor.
covering the E flat. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So here's 1 or 2, right?
I see.
1,
Okay.
2, 3, 4.
Gotcha.
Yep. It's just that the stems make it look as if there are only 3 notes there. I mean,
I
in
see
all
it now.
there are only 3 notes.
I feel.
You see that?
Yes, I do.
That's a little deceptive, right?
It was.
So I can make this appear as if it has only 3 parts as well. Here's my B flat now, and now I'm going to double the tenors and the basses here, not double them, but they're going to sing the same note. That's a little low for the tenor. They can
There
do
you
that
go.
though. You know.
I
So
see.
here you have a complete inversion of all the voice parts here. This one here goes to the other inner voice, and this one here, yeah. And we've doubled it the same way. We've doubled now the root and double the root here. You see?
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I did that, but that's a good observation that we have to really look at the stems. And that's why at this point in the theory training, last year, we didn't really add many stems because we're just sort of doing this, right? We're just stacking. I mean, most people were learning how to read music. They learned that very well and very fast, in fact, because there really isn't too much to reading music. It's not such an an oracle thing as many students assume in the beginning. I mean, I have a colleague at CUNY who prides himself of not being able to read music because he's in his area of study and sort of scholarship is popular music, and there's this sort of affectation in popular music that if you can read music, then you're less of a musician than if you can't read music. So therefore, he builds himself. It's one of the first lines in his resume is that I can't read music. And I said, I mean, because it is really just an affectation. I mean, it's a reverse snobbery, which means it's snobbery. It's BS. I mean, that's what it is. I mean, I sometimes feel like saying to him, hey, look, David, I can teach you how to read music in a week. Don't you want to learn that? Because I think it gives you a tool. You don't have to use it. I mean, look, I just taught a student who was playing. He's one of my really, really, really great students who is auditioning for Yale University. And he already made the first cut, so he's actually really, really good. And he was playing a concerto by Villalobos and a big piece by Bach. And when I teach him, I'm actually not reading it because my ear is still way ahead of. I mean, I started just like most of you guys playing by ear. My ear is still way better than my reading. It's only when my ear sort of runs out of let's say exactitude that I can hear it's an E flat, but I can't really hear if it's here or on the guitar, you can sort of finger in different ways, so you get the same note in different places. Unlike the piano, I mean, you know, that F sharp is only that key, right? On the guitar, you can have it 4 different places. So sometimes I can't really see where the notes are, and I need to look at the score for that. Do you understand? But I can hear everything he's playing, and my ear is still way ahead. So I mean, I've been reading music for many years, and I'm a decent sight reader. By guitar standard, I'm pretty good actually. but my ear is still way ahead, so I choose that tool. And you can do the same thing. This is not to say that all of a sudden you can't improvise anymore. I mean, that's another affectation that people who don't really understand, they seem to believe that once you can read music, you can never improvise again. That's actually not the way it works. I mean, because by reading music, you can feed information into your ears that you would be hard pressed to make up yourself. That's the truth. But anyway, my point is that this is just a technique. We're just learning new chops and you know, tricks to add to your bag of tricks that will make you either be able to keep the job that you already have or move on to a better job if you want a better job, maybe via graduate school and so forth and so on. Okay, let's. So that was E flat. Let's do another one. C sharp minor. Okay. Here's the C sharp. Here's a minor third up. Here's a major third up. So that's a C sharp minor triad right there. C sharp. Oops. C sharp minor. I'm going to invert that. So I'm going to put the C sharp up here. And I'm going to have my G sharp here and my E. Same as the other one. So here's C sharp minor over E. Easy peasy, right? In 4 parts, it looks like this. I'm going to start here and I'm going to move here. C sharp, I'm going to put that down here. That's just a choice. It could have been, you know, another C sharp. And I'm going to put the chordal third on top. Let's say I'm just going to put it up here because that gives me a lot of choice in between. Now I'm going to invert it. I mean, let's just do that. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to project that C sharp up here. So as Gilad said, this goes down by a third, and this one goes up by a third, like that. So I take that E, I put it down here. I take that C sharp, I'll put it up here. And now we're just going to add the inner voices. So I'm now done with my C sharp and my E. Those are placed already. Now I have to place a G sharp. I might as well do that. And I can do that over here again. And now I'm going to double the root of the chord. Here is the root of the chord, right? C sharp, that's what gives it the name. C sharp minor, C sharp minor slash E. And I'm going to double that. I could, you know, I could have placed it up here. That would have taken care of that. But I'm going to do that. And I'm going to do the same here. So you see that very often you would find that the inner voices, there's no need to move them particularly. You can if you want to, but that makes it harder to read. It's going to sound the same, right? But if you want people who are not strong readers, or some people who claim, like my colleague, to not be able to read music, if they're singing this note, they can sing the same note again. Whether they're doing that, quote unquote, by ear or by seeing that, okay, that's the same note. I don't even know what it's called. I don't need to know what it's called. I can just see it's the same note. And let's say that in the next progression here moves up by half step. You know, you can see that it's a note up, and your ear will tell you what that note is. All you have to be able to do is to read direction. You can do that with an amateur chorus. I promise you this will work, but you have to have really strong writing skills. Because if you start flipping this stuff around just because you're an artiste or whatever, then you're going to have this situation where you're going to call extra rehearsals or reduce the complexity of the music, meaning the color of the music. And you simply have to take it all out, which is a pity. And if you want to look at it this way, there's less worship that way, right? We want to give God the best we have, don't we? You know, I think that's a noble way of thinking about art. And to that end, we just need, you know, strong workmanship. This is not composition class, right? We're not composing anything here. We're just examining certain techniques of arranging, basically, right? This is like cutting vegetables. I mean, if you hold the knife in the wrong end, you're going to cut yourself, right? And then there's a certain amount of technique that you have to be able to do. I'm not saying that, okay, the carrots you're cutting have to go into an Ethiopian dish or some French concoction or whatever. That's beside the point. You have to learn how to cut the vegetable, right? And then you can decide what kind of food you want to cook. This, for instance, works really, really well for barbershop quartet arranging. These are the same arranging skills that you're going to use for a barbershop quartet as you're going to do for your bar chorale or for your hymn setting. The same technique. Okay, C minor, we don't need to do that because that's the same as C sharp minor, just a half step down. Let's do this one. D, this is D diminished. So that means D with 2 minor thirds above it. Minor third up from D, 7.5 is F, D to E, E to F. That's a step from D to E, and then E to F is a half step, so that's your minor third. And minor third up from F, F to G, G to A flat. Bingo, right there. I'm going to invert it. That's easy. We're just going to keep these two, and I'm just going to move this one up. So I've now inverted this chord. This is D diminished over F. In 4-part, it looks like this. I'm going to start on the left column. I'm going to move here. I'm going to do the D. Let's say I choose this D. It could have been another D, but I've just chosen that one. And I'm going to take the chordal third, and I'm going to put it, let's say, put it up here, right? That gives us some room to maneuver. Now I'm going to invert it. I'm going to say this D goes up in soprano, and this F goes down here. Now I've flipped the voices, or done the voice exchange. Now I place the D and the F, the D and the F. All I have to worry about is that, so yeah, I can do this to it too, right? Now all I have to do is to place the A flat. Let's just transfer it directly here, and I'm going to transfer it here too. And now I have 3 voices, right? Now I'm going to double the root. The root in the chord is D, because that's what gives it the name. That's easy enough. Here's the D, and here's the D. Do you get it? I think so too. I can see that this is sort of, the cloud is lifting here, because you can see that the more times we're doing it, it's the same way. It doesn't really matter if it's a quote unquote complicated chord. There are no complicated chords. All chords consist of either minor thirds or major thirds. Even the most complex John Coltrane chord consists of minor thirds and major thirds in some combination. Those are the building blocks of harmony. Just like scales, no matter if it's a hyperlocrian or super locrian flat 5 or whatever, you know, I mean, all these names are just sort of invented, I think, very often to show off people's great, you know, technical ability or whatever. I mean, play me a tune, right? If I like it, then I don't care what you call it, really. I mean, that it's just there to sort of hold it, to understand it in some context, and that's all good. But no matter what that scale is called, all these, or most of the scales, not a whole tone scale, right? And not octatonic scales, right? Octatonic, same thing. But all these different scales, no matter the name, consist of whole steps or half steps. Because that's all we have. And yes, some of them, like a whole tone scale, only consist of whole steps. But and that's fine, right? And there's certain other scales that have steps that are either augmented or diminished or whatever. But basically speaking, scales consist of whole steps and half steps in some combination. And harmonies consist of major thirds and minor thirds in some combination. And we just have to, and it's not a lot of things actually. So we have major third, minor third, whole step, half step. So these four, it's like learning how to juggle, right? I mean, if I have 2 pens, for instance, I mean, I learned to juggle 1 pen. I do this, right? Okay, now do it with 2 pens, and all of a sudden it's very difficult, right? And so we have to learn to juggle, but we don't want to juggle more than we can actually handle. Not in the beginning. I want to stay with this stuff here until that's really, really solid, right? So we can do this. Because most of it is simply just being intimidated by, oh, you know, let's say A augmented. Let's do that one. And then I think I'll just wrap it up because I think you get it now. And if you don't, well, you know, just complete the homework or make up some new keys and say, hey, am I doing this right? Because once you do it right once, there's no reason why you couldn't replicate that again. As long as you know what you've done to get it right. If it's purely by chance, then you don't really know what went right or wrong. So it's important that we map it out. This one we don't need to do because that's the same as that one. Let's do this, and this one here is the same as that one, probably, or E flat. Actually, these, so we don't need to do E as well. That's the same as E flat, just transposed up a half step. But A augmented, okay, let's say, you know, all of a sudden I get confused here because what is an augmented triad? Well, an augmented triad is just A and then 2 whole steps, 2 major thirds above it. Here's a major third above A, that's C sharp, because from A to B is a whole step, from B to C sharp is a whole step. So that's my major third here. Now I have to do a major third on top of C sharp. Not a problem. C sharp to D sharp is a whole step, D sharp to E sharp is also a whole step. So there's my A augmented. Let me invert that. And then the A goes up here, right? There is simply A plus or A augmented, A plus over C sharp. It doesn't really matter what kind of triad we're doing, it's the same principle. In 4 parts, it looks like this. I'm going to start with this one here and do the A. Let's say I go down here. I'm going to take the chordal third, C sharp, and put it up here. And let me invert that. C sharp goes up here, or as Gilad said, that the bass moves third, the soprano moves down by a third. And it doesn't really matter if it's a major third or minor third or whatever. It's that kind of A that you have in A augmented. And it's the kind of C that you have in A augmented, which is a C sharp. I'm now going to just fill in, you know, so this is gone, this is gone. I have to place an E sharp, and I have to double the bass. So the bass, I can't double it down here because that will be too low for the tenor, but I can double it up here. And I'm going to double the A again. Now the A is doubled, right? So now I have to place an E sharp, and that makes the choice very simple. Like that. I know it looks simple when I do it because you know, I got the technique down. I mean, in other words, it looks very simple when I cut onions because I've done it before, right? But you can do it too. You just have to do it, and then do it again and say, okay, I have to hold my fingers like this, and I have to hold the knife to the right end. All right, questions? Yeah, so you have tremendous resource. That's good to know, Rebecca. You have a tremendous resource in each other, by the way. If you help out a fellow student, you learn something from doing that. And if you ask your fellow students for help, you because just by articulating, oh, I don't get this. So what don't you get about it? Oh, you know, I can do this. but I don't understand why C sharp is on top, for instance. Then, okay, you don't understand what the fourth and third is, right? So for every question that we can formulate, there is an answer that makes sense and is the, the most productive answer. Sometimes there's more than one answer, right? But I mean, in this case, it's a pretty straightforward process. So why don't you do this? Let me post this this exercise to you. If you, let's say you've done all the exercises here in these keys, do this one here and do that one and do G augmented. Just 3 new keys that are different from each other and that has a little bit of a challenge in spelling the chords. Not much, but enough, right? Just do these 3 keys here and do it the same way as I just did here. And then submit that sometime before next Monday. You understand that.
Question is, I can't really see. Is that an E diminished or E sharp?
Yeah, E diminished. And then G augmented, yeah?
Thank you.
So the point here is that the homework is just to see how well does it fly when you're sitting at home with just your paper, right? And bring it in sometime. It's not to give you some red mark on a piece of paper and some letter name or whatever, because what ends up happening that the students are just taking that result and thinking that that's a sort of pronouncement of my intelligence or my future in music. It's none of the kind. It just
That's what
work
happened
like
to
that.
me. Yeah, that's what happened to me.
Yeah.
I just plain stopped. So I didn't audition for any of the summer programs that people were like, Dana, your voice is this, that. Why aren't you at Chautauqua? Why aren't you here? Why aren't you there? But because I felt shut out from this. And I didn't want anybody to know. I mean, I got as far as Italy at one point. I went to a festival there and I worked my butt off to get some of this stuff in my memory banks. But when a brand new composer hands you a brand new piece of music and you feel like you can't decipher it, and I had to give it back to him, that was one of the most mortifying moments of my life. I felt like I had insulted him. And so I just kind of went back into hiding and I kept things here in Connecticut, didn't do too much outside because I just didn't want, so this is like the first time when I really feel like it's being explained in a way that is accessible and usable for me. It's a really big deal. So
well, that pleases me no end, because the all important thing for me is that you get to tell your story in music, right? Do you understand? That we get to hear your musical expression and share that part of your life, which I can sense already is a very deep part of you. That's been, and you're not the only one. Very, very, very often students feel intimidated by this stuff, and I did too, by the way. I mean, I was hiding away. I went to very competitive performance programs. Luckily, I had reasonably good fingers, and when I was younger and all that, I was sort of, given a lot of support in many ways. But in terms of this stuff, I was just hiding away all my student days and just scraping by until I got to my very last leg of my education. I said, okay, this is the last chance I've ever had to get this right. And luckily, I was mature enough to really, dedicate myself to learning it. And I had some very, very good teachers who also understood. And I had probably proven myself enough, having attained a certain level and already some degrees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I understood at that point that I don't want to go too much into, not right now, but later on I might share some of my background with you. which is a little bit unusual too. I mean, as a matter of fact, it's highly, highly unusual because I didn't have a regular school. I was thrown out of school at 15, and I worked in hard labor for almost till I was 24 before I started studying music. I worked as a lumberjack almost 10 years, which you're not going to meet many lumberjacks who graduated from the Royal Academy of Music or from Yale University or whatever. And it's not that I deserve a medal for that, but I mean, it's just that the academic stuff really intimidated me. And I think one of the reasons why I approach it in a slightly different way is that it intimidated me, but also I had to explain this to myself first before I could actually teach it. So I had to internalize this and turn it into something, and I kept wondering why things were taught the way that they are, you know, because I think a lot of that is complete rubbish, really, you know. They're not, I mean, people are not really seeing the patterns that became the sort of trademark way of thinking. And you'll see that as we move forward, that there's a great deal of, I think, if I have any special talent, it's not for understanding this any better than the next guy, but I may have a good knack for explaining things that are quite complicated and making them very simple. And also seeing patterns that I think is often overlooked. You know, it's all about recognizing patterns, you know, in my opinion. And music theory is very much like that. And that, you know, that's just my particular skill, that I could sort of explain what my ear, because my ear was always ahead of me, right? I mean, I could always hear these things. And it was incredibly frustrating to me that I couldn't explain what it is that my ear could hear. And this became the language through which I could explain, I'm hearing this, I'm hearing that the voices are exchanging places, etc. I mean, not that I invented this, I certainly didn't, but I can hear it now. And I can hear when it happens in Miles Davis and when it happens in Stravinsky, etc. I mean, it's just that the application of this is probably where I may be slightly different to the next guy. Anyway, that's all good. So I'm glad that we're all. The most important thing is to tune in every time we get a chance. You know, the important thing is not to attain some sort of grade that's going to go on your transcript. That's the least important thing. The all important thing is to learn this stuff. But the odd thing is that if you learn it, or when you learn it, the grade will come by itself, because it's a result of actually having learned it. It's not the other way around, that we sort of hide away and try to cover it up, and then we're happy with the A that we get for having successfully cheated the whole world of not knowing this stuff. It's not a good way to live, really, you know, because we're living a lie. And it's about time that we sort of step out in the light and say, hey, explain this to me, because I don't understand this. And that's all it takes, just the honesty there. And I mean, that's the great thing about teaching at Nyack, is that the students are not really shy of doing that. And they're not, and also being a Christian school, the students are helping each other out a great deal. All of that is really good. Okay, so let's wrap it up here and say that we'll meet again next Monday, and we'll take as long as this takes, because once this is in the bank, you know, we've taken a really giant step forward. John Coltrane quote there. Okay, guys, have a wonderful week, and see you Monday, yeah?
Thank you, Professor.
Thank you so much. Blessings, guys. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.